Hello and welcome to Your Business, Your Wealth. My name is Paul Adams. I'm the CEO and founder of Sound Financial Group, and I'm joined today by a special co-host. This is Jeff Miller. Jeff is one of our partners here at Sound Financial Group, advisor, and some of you may recognize him from our episode 138. He is also a millionaire next door and a guy who made his career change as a result of becoming a client of our firm. Jeff Miller, so glad you could join us on Your Business, Your Wealth.
Good morning, Paul. It's great to be back here after, 100 episode hiatus?
Man, I don't know, we had to wait for a worldwide pandemic to settle down before we had you back on the show.
Yeah, well, I am very glad to be here again this morning.
We're going to have some fun today, guys, because Jeff and I have collected a set of articles, a way of looking at the world. We're going to be talking about things like why your actively managed mutual funds don't outperform the market, and an author that tries to make the case that actively managers, the people that are trading stocks, give you guys a little bit of background, people who trade stocks inside of a mutual fund for the sake of outperforming the market as a whole. So we're going to hit that. Then we're going to talk a little bit about how Transamerica got their rear ends sued off because they did not give their own employees. This is a huge financial services company. It does a truckload of 401ks. As you're listening, you might have a Transamerica 401k, and yet they got sued for not giving appropriate choices for their employees. We're going to talk about how you and your companies can avoid that. Then we're going to talk about a pretty sensitive subject, that our parents and them being ready or not to live a life of dignity and independence into their old age, and how do you broach that conversation with them? So, Jeff, are you ready? We'll hit our first one.
I am ready. Let's do this.
All right. So I'm going to jump over here, introduce everybody to this one. We're going to talk about this. This is an article from Kiplinger's, and the stated headline by Adam Shell is, "When actively managed funds are worth it. For some investment categories, choosing an actively managed fund makes sense." Now, first thing I want everybody to notice is choosing an actively managed fund makes sense for some investment categories. So one thing that I think is to note about this article is they're going to make a case for active management, Jeff, but the first thing they did is fold. Like in a poker game. First thing is okay, we definitely, active managers are not better everywhere else.
But in some instances,
that's right.
We purport that they could be.
We purport that they could be. You're right. So we're kind of scrolling down here, getting down to about the third or fourth article. But it says right up front, the numbers don't lie. It says only 1/4 of all actively managed funds in the U.S. top the average of their index fund counterparts over the 10-year period that ended in June. So 25% of actively managed mutual funds, meaning there's a manager who is trading stocks based upon their belief and research that those stocks will outperform the market, and then each of these mutual funds, stock-based mutual funds, equity-based mutual funds, raise their hand and say, this is the index I should be compared to. But it says only 25% of them outperform the market.
Right. And that's certainly consistent with the data and the research that we've seen, Paul, over the last probably several decades about, how active managers perform relative to their benchmark. And so this 25% over 10 years, that's not surprising to us. It's consistent with the research that we've seen. Indeed.
And one thing that is not talked about often, and I didn't have the graphic up for us today to pull it up, Jeff, but I'm thinking about that one graphic we have where it shows even if you chose the top performers, the top 25% performers, and then track them for another 10 years after the period where they were the top performers, and only 25% of them perform the top 25%.
Right. So it's a funnel.
Yeah, you could just pick them at random.
Fewer and fewer active managers will consistently, reliably, and repeatably be able to outperform those indexes.
And I would say they may consistently, because that's a back testing, but they're not predictable. Meaning at the beginning of any given year, we have no way to know which of these active managers will outperform. 1/4 of them do. And then the one funny thing is if you go deep into the research, and I realize, Jeff, I've never really talked about this much on the show, but you get deeper into the research and what you find is even those funds that outperformed over a 10-year period, it's usually due to 1 or 2 outlying years. It's not consistent performance. It's that they had a couple of years that worked out really good that put them on the top. So
yes,
we'll keep working our way down. And they say, but in certain pockets of the market, active managers do a better job of beating their benchmarks. Now, I'm going to pause there. And I'm going to play our video clip again of a woman that's giving us great advice when the media is telling us anything.
I love my country, but this is what's wrong with America. This is why I tell y'all all the time, think for yourself, critical thinking. Don't believe everything the media tells you. If the media gives you information with the intent to produce an emotional response, something's not factual.
If the media shares something with you that is meant to give you an emotional response rather than an intellectual one, then somebody is trying to pull one over on you. But so I'm going to read, with that context, I want to read that line in the article again. But in certain pockets of the market, active managers do a better job of beating their benchmarks. Now, does that mean 27% of them outperform their indexes? Because here's the funny things. Studies show that active funds that invest in small and mid-sized companies, foreign shares, and intermediate-term bonds, for instance, have more success beating their benchmarks than funds in other market segments, according to Morningstar. Except, as you scroll through the rest of this article, they literally do not say what the better is.
Right. Is it better by 50 basis points, 350 basis points?
Or is it not better than the indexes on average at all? It's just a better average of beating the indexes. So instead of only 25% beating the index, it's 28%. That would make this article true if it's just 28%. But you see, they don't tell us. You see, when you make a sweeping generalization, it's hard to be proven wrong, which is why you see so many sweeping generalizations. Then it talks a little bit more, areas of the market that are less picked over and are more target rich for active fund managers. That's these smaller, less traded markets. But the point of this is you could read this entire article. So it talks about finding stocks that fly under the radar. And it's like, oh my gosh, look at these funds. And some of them have just crushed it. We looked at, and I think I'm going to potentially embarrass myself and try to do something live for you guys. But we looked up, would you remember which one it was? It's the one that had a 5% load on it.
Yeah, it was one of the, it was the Alger mid-cap growth.
Alger, or the Artisan mid-cap growth? ARTMX?
AMGAX.
Oh, you are awesome. Okay, guys, so I'm taking you live. We didn't prepare for this. We're live recorded, of course. This time we didn't live stream it. I'm logging in live with you to a website called personalfund.com. And give me that code again.
Ticker symbol AMGAX.
Got it. So we go into this one, and one of the things they're telling us about is, well, look at all of these funds. They performed really well, and they did. Like, no joke. This fund that they're talking about in this article, you can see here on personalfund.com, which incidentally, if you guys haven't seen it, I wonder, could you go in and just see if you can find it, Jeff, when we had Sharkansky on the show? I was figuring I'd give people that one because he's the guy who created your personalfund.com, and we had him on the show, but I am just blanking. I'm going to try really quick to find it, Jeff, so we don't have to sweat it, but let's see.
Yes. Episode
You're so good.
174.
Episode 174, if you guys want to go back, we interviewed the guy who developed this website, who his analytical tools allow us to see through some of the marketing stuff from these financial institutions, see what the funds really cost. And so your pre-tax return was 44%, but that fund would have a decent amount of turnover. They're doing a decent amount of trading. And what you can see below is, one, that share, if you buy it from an advisor, has a front-end load. You can buy it with no load online. So you see the beginning of that 5%. We'll come back and explain what that is in a minute. But then you can see it compared to other indexes. But here we just heard about these do better at outperforming their index. Out of the thousands of potential stocks or mutual funds they could have shown for their article, and that one literally pre-tax underperformed the Vanguard Mid-Cap Index Fund that charges 0.5%. Those are both, and here barely outperformed the actual index at 39 and 38 respectively.
So if you were to purchase, not online, right, through Fidelity or Schwab, that Alger mid-cap growth fund, you would pay 5% off the top for the privilege of being a part of that investment strategy that at the end of that period underperformed its low-cost index peer fund that you could purchase through Vanguard. You
got it. And there's a big and here. The ongoing costs are atrocious on that fund. Again, we're not picking on this fund. No offense intended to the developers of that fund. Some offense intended to the author. And that is, we have here a total cost. Now, see taxes you paid for holding the fund. I'm going to take that out because that's in part because of how much gain it had. So we're going to leave that out. The ongoing costs of this fund are 5% minus the 2.45. That 5% we saw up top was the annual cost of owning it, not even the front end load. It's 2.55% to own that fund. That's before you have an advisor helping you with that account. And you see, it's just that it's just an article. If we go back up to the top and think of our woman that gave us wonderful advice from TikTok, when actively managed funds are worth it. They already told you the premise of their article. And so what I want to do when I'm reading an article like that, whether it agrees with me or disagrees with me, I want to interrogate their upfront premise as I read. Do I see something here in the article that actually backs up what I see in the headline? Small incidental thing, that's probably a good idea to do in any news story. And just for fun, if you guys want to, comment down below. And if you read a news story recently, tell us what you read where the article headline was wildly different than the content of the article. And if you want to, post a link. We'd love to check them out too. But actively managed mutual funds, are they worth it? I don't think the evidence shows that they are. But here we are. And from Kiplinger's and from Adam Schell saying sometimes they are. So with that, let's make a little shift, Jeff, to your domain. What a lot of people don't know is Mr. Jeff Miller works with all of our retirement plans inside of Sound Financial Group and works with those employers and helps them keep those plans up to date, along with working with his clients who are those executives and business owners. Some of you listening work directly with Jeff as your advisor, as your household financial officer. But now we're going to talk a little bit about Transamerica. This article made me smile in horror. I'll explain why. I cannot tell you, since some of these guidelines came out, and Jeff and I talk with clients about it often, that they haven't reviewed their 401k in a long time. They may have fees that are too high, or they don't have investment selections that are as good as they could be for their employees. And none of us can help it. We have momentum, even if that momentum is us sitting still. So to talk to an employer that doesn't feel like anything's wrong with their plan, and they go, well, what are the odds I'm going to get sued? Well, the odds are better than zero.
Yes.
And so
even if your core business is to provide 401k plans, administration, and of course that fiduciary duty that comes with offering a plan to your employee population.
And let's say you are one of the largest financial institutions in the country doing that for your employees, and they sue your tail off. So here is the article title from the Des Moines Register. Zach Thompson wrote the article, Judge OK's $5.4 million settlement over Transamerica retirement plan. Now, a federal judge approved a $5.4 million settlement between Transamerica, its current and former employees who accused the company of offering several poor-performing investments in its employee retirement plan. So the accusation wasn't even you overcharged us fees, although for some of you have 401ks that are charging too much in fees to your employees. It wasn't that the employer absconded with any money or didn't make the deposits on time, also risks of having a 401k. Literally, like, you just gave us poor investments.
Yes, and maybe some of those poor investment choices were actively managed mutual funds that did not outperform their relative benchmarks.
I'll be damned.
This article says over a 10-year period. So
it's almost like we're teaching on this podcast some things that would be useful and help people avoid, having underperforming assets and or getting their butts sued off.
That's right. Go figure.
It's almost like we're being helpful. Okay. So Attorney Charles Field, who represented the employees, said the settlement provides genuine and meaningful relief to the group. Now, I'm not going to play our wonderful TikToker again telling us we should be careful when somebody's trying to make us feel a certain way. Now, Jeff, for those of you that don't know him, this is a guy who is exact. As soon as we start talking about this article, Jeff pulls up a calculator and he says to me,
this one.
Here is, it's only X amount per employee. So could you give that again?
Yes. So Paul, what I did, my first inclination was, okay, what does this 5.4 million represent when we spread that out over 24,000 impacted current or former participants in the Transamerica 401k plan. So,
and right before you say that, I just want to read this quote again. Attorney Charles Field, who represented the employees, said, the settlement provides genuine and meaningful relief to the group, which, by the way, if any of you know these people, articles, authors, people we mentioned in articles, and you're connected with them on social media, send them the article. I would love for one of these people to get mad at us and say, put me on the show. I want to clear up my reputation, and we will do it. Okay. Jeff, how much per employee?
So I do not argue that the settlement provides genuine relief. $5.4 million is genuine money. But when we allocate that over 24,000 individuals, that is an average of, drum roll please, you ready? $225 per person.
$225. Now, that's before the attorneys get whatever their cut is as part of the settlement. So of the 5.4 million, if there's a 30% fee to the attorneys,
right, we'll take that. So that 225 becomes $175 or $150 per person. So I don't know if that is meaningful relief, Paul.
I would say it's probably not meaningful relief. But if you're the attorney that just won a settlement against one of the largest financial institutions for not running their own 401k well, in a certain way, spike the football, say what you want about it. We'll give you a lot of grace. But in all likelihood, something like this will be a big deal to many, many, many employers out there because employees read articles like this. So we need to make sure that you're reviewing your plans on a regular basis. You make sure it's up to snuff for your employees. And if you're like someone, I cannot tell you guys in the audience how often we meet somebody who has done some basic financial planning for themselves as an owner, and then they have the company 401k, but nobody has looked at the company 401k in 5 or 6 years. We had one plan that we took over years ago that was a Transamerica plan, had been sold by an advisor that hadn't been heard from in 5 to 7 years, and the company had grown tremendously over that time. We were able to go in, become the advisor of record on the plan, negotiate with Transamerica to drop the cost of this very, very large plan by about 0.15%, which was a lot of money on that plan. And we were able to get a better lineup of funds all put in while saving the employer money and getting everybody in the plan better investment options. That's the importance of staying on top of these things. It's not just getting sued. It's also all the people who never got sued, but maybe because of what they had in their 401k, they were not winning the affection and loyalty of their employees that they wanted. So just for fun, if you guys want to, put down in the comments below, who is your employer 401k with, or do you know? You don't have to tell your employer anything like that. Just like the vendor is Transamerica, the vendor is ABC Trust, whatever it is, throw it down below and let us know if you noticed anything in your 401k. And a real fun one is just look at some of the most popular funds that are listed and see if any of them have fund level charges that are less than 75 basis points. You will see a lot of them over 1 basis point because it's how they finance a lot of these plans. All right. Now we got one more to go. And this is a heavy one, guys. We're going to be going deep, Jeff and I. Jeff and I are generally known as, Corey talks about me being not Sue sensitive. I'm about as discreet as a sledgehammer in some conversations. So we're going to be broaching a difficult topic with everyone today. This article, and this is from, I forget what they are, the Peacock Network. Which one is that? CBS, ABC? I don't know.
This was CNBC.
CNBC, there we go. What to do when your parents didn't save for retirement. Here's why you should have the retirement conversation now, plus some tips on what to say. Now, once again, the article headline is misleading. The subheadline is actually a better title for the article because they don't give you much help on what to do if they didn't save for retirement. But it's actually a very helpful article, and you guys can find all this. The link below will take you to our website where we'll have all these resources posted for you. But let's go here and talk about these older folks. We know many older people haven't planned for retirement. If you're waiting to have a conversation with your parents about what their retirement plan is, you shouldn't put it off any longer. A recent report by the Federal Reserve found that more than 25% of non-retired adults had no retirement savings at all. According to a 2020 AARP report, almost 1/3 of adults with at least one living parent are providing financial support to them, and more than 40% expect to provide support in the future. So, Jeff, you've been in the marketplace for a long time. You built a great career, retired from that one. You got this crazy idea in your head. You wanted to help people be financially independent and joined us. What would you guess the biggest factor is in older folks? And I'm not talking like big studies, any of that's just your own personal experience of being somebody who has been incredibly diligent with your money over decades and decades, enough that you and your wife have financial independence. What is it you think that stops, and let's just take the generation that's, 10, 15 years older than you, the people that you saw as you were diligent and saving and growing your career, you saw them in different activities. What's your biggest guess as to why, as just a man on the ground, this happens, that so many people end up over age 65 and needing help?
This could be an hour-long conversation just on this subject, but I would assert, number one, it's everybody, irrespective of your age. We all have a difficult time in seeing our future selves, imagining that Jeff or Paul someday, God willing, in the future we'll be sitting around at like 85-year-old guys, hopefully still doing these types of conversations. But we talk about in our work that we undertake with clients, we talk about a concept of the feedback loop, and money has one of the longest feedback loops of anything that we experience in life. And as a result, oftentimes when we reach a point where we're confronted with the fact that we haven't prepared for our financial future, we haven't saved enough, or our consumption rates have been higher than we can sustain when our income stops, it's too late to make any meaningful changes. So I think that's number one, Paul, would be that money has a very long feedback loop. And by the time we get that feedback loop, too late to make those meaningful changes.
And that feedback loop for our audience that may not be as familiar, we talk with our clients about simple feedback loops. Like if I eat too much food, it takes about 5 to 10 days, I'll start stacking on pounds immediately. So bad short-term decision, I get a relatively short-term bad consequence for that bad behavior. I drink too much tonight, I'll have a headache tomorrow morning, right? You don't sleep well enough a couple nights in a row, you really feel fatigued on day 3. Those are short feedback loops, and those guide our behavior as human beings. And that's true in every area except money. In money, it basically feels wonderful for 40 years. And then as Jeff mentioned, when you get too close to the end of it, where the loop informs you, instead of you foreseeing where it was going, it's often too late to do much about. I think that's a great insight. Like, it's just not on their radar. Everything else is just, whether it's an advertiser, kids' college, whatever, that's coming at them all the time. This it's coming eventually.
Right. And in my experience, it always feels better to spend money now and consume something, whether it's, buying a new thing or going on a trip or going out to dinner. That feels really good in the moment, versus imagine just putting that same amount of money away towards your future that you might not, live into for another 10, 20, 30 years. Spending money generally feels pretty good in the moment.
Well, I would say, and the only thing better that feels better than laying down money right now to enjoy something right now is enjoying something right now and then paying for it over like 7 years. That feels even better than paying for money now. Like, I don't even have to pay, and I can start enjoying it. Those are, and our biology, y'all, isn't prepared for the amount of marketing that comes at us or the temptations. I remember talking to a friend of mine who 20 years ago was working with this very wealthy 80-plus-year-old woman. And she's worth, I think, 70 or 90 million. And he said to her, hey, how did you go about doing this? He was young at the time. He said, how'd you go about building up all of these assets, everything else? And what do you think the challenge will be to your kids? And she sat back and thought, and she said, I think it was easier for me because when I was young, there was a lot less to say no to. Mm-hmm. And now not only have people possibly grown up in generations where there was not there wasn't as much to say no to, as she put it, but then they're getting a chance to now have access to everything. Prime Now, have it delivered, pay for your cell phone over 3 years, all those little things.
Buy it now. Yeah.
Oh, man, or that, I forget the comedian's name, but he's so funny. He's like literally, one day shipping wasn't enough. We now have an app called Prime Now. He's like, I want the app like where I'm about to hit the button and it shows up in my hand. That's what I want. He's like, this Prime Now is taking too long. All right. So one thing that is, I liked this tip from this is they recommend people start the conversation with their parents by depersonalizing it. You might want to mention a news story you heard about a parent who forgot to create a will, or a statistic you read about the significant number of people are undersaving for retirement before segueing the conversation about your parents' personal finances. Now, I'm going to give you the sledgehammer and a velvet bag version of this. I would just make no bones about it and talk to your parents and say, hey, I want to talk about how you guys are doing financially and whether or not my family, my spouse and I need to be in some planning to make sure that you're okay in the long run. And I'm also of the mindset that some people say, well, it's my parents, they created the problem, it's their worry. I would have anyone in that mindset to just pause for a moment for this reason. they're your blood. Biologically, you share DNA. I think the way we're wired up is not something that can be just easily, it's their problem that they created their life. Now, it might be that easy for you. It might be tattered and torn relationships and all that. All you should want to do at a minimum, maybe even before having this conversation, is talk with your spouse first if you're married and say, hey, we need to have this talk with my parents, but are we going to say no? Are we going to say the most we'll help you with is a little bit to buy medicine and shelter? Or are we going to provide them a certain level of lifestyle? Have that conversation with your spouse first. That's probably the one that should be talked about before talking to the parents. So you know what your shared interpretation of your willingness to be responsible for their future before you know if they need help. Because it's a lot easier to have that conversation before you know than if it's staring you right in the face. And it's sure easier to do right now than 10 years from now when they really need the help. Anything you'd throw in on that, Jeff?
You know, it's just one of those, money is one of those topics that are often not discussed. Not even at the family level, Paul, even at the level of a committed relationship, you know, spousal situation. We encounter a lot of individuals and families that when we first begin our work together, where it's quite evident that even those two individuals in that relationship under that household aren't having conversations about money together, aren't necessarily on the same page, aren't both involved in the decision-making process. There may be, you know, one spouse that is making all or the majority of those financial decisions, and really it's about communication and dialogue. And, you know, money is just one of those topics that often isn't talked about, yet it's so critical to our ability to not only maintain a great life in the present, but to be prepared for the future.
Conversations about money are required to have a good life in the present and prepare for the future. That is gold. I have a totally different way to approach this. Maybe I should write an article on it. And what I think we ought to do is really just go to your parents immediately and say, what are your sexual proclivities? What are you into? Do you guys use handcuffs at all? Any toys? You know, what's that look like? And when your parents are like mortified, you need to be deadpan serious. And then when they're like mortified, like, what are you talking about? We're not going to talk to you about that. I'm just kidding. I wanted to talk about money. It'll seem like so easy to broach that subject. You just got to line it up next to something else. Don't talk about recipes and then transition to money. No, you got to go hard, or religion, maybe hammer politics super hard. And then like, this is what I want to talk to you about. And then go, oh no, I'm just want to talk about money. And then people be like, oh, whew, yeah, here's what our balance sheet looks like. Now, this article, this is where it falls apart, is it gets into what you should do. Now, this is not what to do as often as we talk about in these articles, because it gets into getting a clear picture of your parents' finances. Okay, that's good. You do need to know where their money is, and that's kind of the first paragraph there. If they haven't begun saving for retirement, it's never too late to start. Okay. It is never too late to start. That's true. Sorta. But right. You can sure as hell start too late to finish. You can start too late to finish. But you're right. You never start too late to be able to start. So, but it goes on. If they haven't begun saving retirement, you might want to encourage your parents to open a Roth IRA. Okay, stop. If your parents haven't planned for retirement and you're an adult enough that you're reading this article, let's say you're 35, your parents are 55, then you get them diligently putting $6,000 a year away. They haven't saved a dime in their life, but due to a short conversation with their children, they're going to start putting away $14,000 a year for the maximum into their Roth IRA each. And then they're going to put that in for 10 years and they'll have $100,000, maybe $170,000 with some growth. Jeff, if they have $200,000 and they start using that for income, how much income can they take a year?
Reliably, based on what we teach our clients, the 4% distribution rule. I don't need a calculator for this. I think that's about $8,000 per year, not per month.
Taxable.
Taxable.
A year, $8,000. And, or like it's either $8,000 a year, for fairly assured for the rest of your life, or it's one really awesome weekend in Vegas. That's it. You just cash out your Roth IRA. Like, we're going down. What's Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas? I never saw the movie, but I understand somebody who has a total train wreck and like ends their life in Vegas. Maybe that's the move. You just save up till you can't work anymore and then have one giant rager and just end it. I probably shouldn't joke about that. There are probably people who are going to do that. So my apologies to everybody who was thinking about implementing that strategy. That was not actual financial advice. Like, we need the disclosure that Dave Ramsey gets on his show, where he's like, basically, I'm not licensed. Don't listen to me. You need a professional. Meanwhile, he screams from the rooftops not to listen to professionals, which segues me to my next problem with this article. Get precise with numbers, run calculations, And right here, it says, if you want a more hands-off approach to investing for retirement, you should consider signing up for a robo-advisor like Wealthfront or Betterment. If your children are having to talk to you about, hey, you should save up enough money so I don't have to support you for the rest of my life, that's not a hands-off approach situation. That is, here's my financial advisor. You sit with them.
Sounds more like an all hands on deck situation, not let's outsource and invest as little of our time and energy in this problem, because it's a huge problem. I would say all hands on deck.
Yeah, it's a huge and inevitable problem that's coming at them. I'll give you guys like a very graphic example I heard years ago. And this was in a business setting, not an investment setting. And the guy was just talking about how we need to prepare our entire careers for our careers to be over. And he said, I want you to imagine you're at the edge of a canyon, and it's like a 300-foot drop, like unsurvivable if you fall. And 10 men with shotguns aimed at you are all surrounding you in like a half circle. But you've got like 100 yards before the cliff. And you say, what are these guys doing here? And they look at you and they say nothing. But you can't go past us. Now, like, what are you guys going to do? Well, we're not going to do anything. But we're going to just start walking toward the edge of the canyon a little bit. And at the edge of that canyon is a tightrope. Now, you've got 40 years to figure out how to cross that tightrope. But over 40 years, these folks, the highly consequential situations that we will face in our old age, keep creeping in on us and push us up against the edge. And you've got a choice to be prepared to walk across that tightrope because you practice your tail off for 40 years, or you're just going to make the best go of it you can to try to cross that canyon. Lots of people do. They have to. Nobody wants the consequences just to get them. Everybody tries to survive. But for all of you listening, like, you don't want your kids to watch you have to survive that. And some of you are out there who are watching or know you're going to watch your parents go through old age in a tough way, and you're going to help whatever way you can. But I promise all of you listening, and Jeff, check with me if you would agree with this, having this conversation now, as difficult as it might be, as upsetting as people could be, as you may have parents that scream and yell, well, if I didn't pay for your college, then that stuff's going to happen. But all of that will be less uncomfortable. I don't know. That's how I'd say it, Jeff. But like, it will not be as bad as watching them go through decades of potential poverty. And some of you listening right now are just hitting it out of the park in your mid-30s. Like, your parents have time. They might have to work till they're 70. But the idea that our parents all raised us to have consequential situations around us, like, that's why we got spanked. That's why we got grounded. That's why we got toys taken away, because our parents were trying to prepare us for the consequential world that was not going to be as nice. I show my kids articles of people that had Ponzi schemes or defrauded other people. And I say, this is why you guys get punished so terribly if you lie, because in real life, you end up in jail for years. And we'd rather you learn it while you lose a device, not while you're losing your freedom. This might be the kind of thing that we have to introduce this consequential situation to our parents. And to add to what Jeff said earlier about what distracts people from this, we also have a generation whose parents had pensions. They watched their parents be able to retire, and there was no conversation of putting money in your 401k or sacrificing you had to sacrifice, to save up for the next car back then. But you didn't sacrifice for saving for retirement because your pension and Social Security handled that. And that's not the case for us anymore. It's not the case for most of your parents. My mom is one of those last few people who retired with a pension that was more than enough to totally care for her needs for the rest of her life. But she got that pension. It's a federal government pension. That's the old one. That's over 40 some years old now. Like that, even the government pensions aren't that good anymore. But that's what the generation's example was before them. And it might have to be the example behind them from their children that's going to save them. So with that, Jeff, anything else you want everybody to leave with today as they go out into the world, understanding that Transamerica got their butt suit off, that we have articles telling us active managers can do a great job, but no data to back it up. And this difficult conversation we have to broach with our parents someday.
All separate issues, but all related to money and our financial futures. There's a lot of noise out there, a lot of articles, a lot of headlines that are going to grab your attention, perhaps agitate your biology, cause you to take an action or begin thinking in a way that actually might not even be grounded in reality or truth. What I would say is that we as a firm are committed to helping individuals, families, small business owners understand and navigate through all of this confusion. And we're always an offer of help, whether that's simply having an initial conversation and sharing our philosophy with you to see if there might be a fit for us to work together.
No, I don't think that could be said much better. So I'm going to let your words stand as our final contribution to the audience for their thinking this week. And for all of you out there, like if what Jeff said resonated with you and you want to reach out, have a conversation with one of our advisors and see whether or not it would even make sense to have a second conversation. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at info@sfgwa.com. That's like short for SFG Way. You can also send to info@sfgway. That will work also. .com. With that, also hit us up. Follow us on all the social media stuff. Be sure to like and subscribe. Share this episode with somebody. And if you give us an honest review on any of the podcast platforms, email us a screenshot and we'll send you a copy of our latest book. With that, Jeff, I'm so glad you could be with us today. And I'm so glad that all of you could be here. And we hope that this episode has been a contribution to you being able to design and build a good life.